I was staring at my phone screen in complete disbelief, my hands actually shaking as notification after notification lit up my banking app. $3,200, $2,800, $1,500, $750. My credit card was being drained right before my eyes, and I hadn't authorized a single charge. The descriptions made my stomach drop. Airline tickets, luxury resort booking, premium spa package, car rental service. My parents had told me I could join their family vacation to Hawaii only if I paid my own way. I'd said no thanks, but apparently they'd decided that didn't matter. They'd stolen my credit card information and charged everything anyway, assuming I'd just accept it and go along with their plan like I always had before. But not this time. My finger hovered over my phone screen for exactly 2 seconds before I opened the banking app, selected every single fraudulent charge, and hit dispute all. Then I froze the card completely. 30 seconds later, my brother Brandon's text came through. "They're denying our tickets at the gate. What did you do?" I typed back with surprisingly steady fingers. "What you all said. I'm paying my own way." 3 weeks earlier, I'd been sitting at my parents' dining room table, picking at the roasted chicken my mother had made for our monthly family dinner. These gatherings had become increasingly uncomfortable over the past few years, but I kept showing up because I didn't want to be accused of abandoning the family. That accusation came anyway, in smaller ways, nearly every time. My older brother Brandon sat across from me, with his wife Courtney, both of them looking relaxed and happy. Brandon was 32, a successful real estate agent who drove a luxury sedan and wore expensive watches. Courtney worked part-time as a yoga instructor, but spent most of her energy redecorating their house and planning elaborate vacations. My younger sister Amber sat to my left, scrolling through her phone between bites. At 24, she was in graduate school, studying education, still financially dependent on our parents for tuition and living expenses. Then there was me, Genevieve, 28 years old, software developer, living alone in a 3-bedroom house I'd bought 2 years ago. I made good money, saved responsibly, and had worked hard to build a stable, independent life. Somehow, that had become a problem. My father Gerald cleared his throat, and everyone looked up. He was 58, retired early after he and my mother Patricia sold their accounting firm. They'd done well for themselves, and liked everyone to know it. Gerald smiled broadly and reached for Patricia's hand. She was 55, perfectly styled as always, her blonde hair freshly highlighted, and her nails recently manicured. "We have an announcement," Gerald said, his voice warm with excitement. "We're taking the family to Hawaii. 2 weeks in Maui. We found this incredible resort right on the beach." Amber squealed and clapped her hands together. "Oh my gosh, really? When?" 6 weeks from now, Patricia said, beaming. "We'll fly out on a Saturday morning, spend 2 full weeks in paradise, and come back rested and happy, as a family." Brandon grinned and squeezed Courtney's hand. "That sounds amazing, Dad. Courtney and I have been talking about going to Hawaii." "Well, now you won't have to plan it yourselves," Gerald said proudly. "We're taking care of everything. Flights, hotel, rental car, activities, the whole package." I felt a small flutter of something in my chest. It had been years since we'd taken a real family vacation. Maybe this would be good. Maybe this would help us reconnect. Then Patricia turned to me, and her smile changed slightly. Became a little tighter. "Genevieve, you're welcome to join us, of course," she said carefully. "But you'll need to cover your own expenses, since you're doing so well with your tech job and everything." I blinked, certain I'd misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" "Well, honey, you make good money," Patricia continued, her tone suggesting this was perfectly reasonable. "Brandon has Courtney to support, and Amber is still in school. But you're single. You don't have anyone depending on you. You can afford it." I looked around the table. Brandon was suddenly very interested in his plate. Courtney was sipping her wine. Amber looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. "Wait," I said slowly, trying to keep my voice calm. "You're paying for Brandon and Courtney. You're paying for Amber. But I have to pay for myself because I'm single and have a good job? Gerald jumped in, his voice taking on that patient, explanatory tone that always made me feel like a child. Genevieve, you have to understand. Brandon has responsibilities. He and Courtney are planning for their future, maybe starting a family soon. Amber is investing in her education. You're established. You're stable. It makes sense. I felt heat rising in my face. Brandon makes more money than I do. He's a real estate agent in a great market. How does this make sense? Patricia's lips pressed into a thin line. Well, you never come to family events anyway, she said, an edge creeping into her voice. You're always too busy with work or your friends. We figured you probably wouldn't even want to come. There it was, the familiar pattern. I was excluded, then blamed for being excluded. I was left out of plans, then criticized for not participating. It had been happening my whole life, and I'd spent years trying to figure out what I was doing wrong. But sitting there at that table, looking at my mother's defensive expression and my father's dismissive shrug, something clicked into place. I wasn't doing anything wrong. This was a choice they were making. I set down my fork carefully. I appreciate the invitation, I said quietly, but I'm going to decline. I hope you all have a wonderful trip. Oh, don't be like that, Courtney said, speaking up for the first time. They're trying to include you. By asking me to pay thousands of dollars while covering everyone else's expenses? I asked, keeping my tone level. That's not inclusion. That's a transaction. Brandon finally looked up, and there was something smug in his expression. You know what, Jen? Maybe it's better if you don't come. You'd probably just complain the whole time anyway. I stood up, gathering my purse and jacket. Thank you for dinner. I need to go. Patricia looked genuinely shocked. You're leaving? We haven't even had dessert. I'm tired, I said simply. Good night. I walked out to my car, hands trembling as I unlocked the door. My phone buzzed before I'd even pulled out of the driveway. A text from my mother. We're booking everything tomorrow. Last chance to change your mind. We'll need your card information by tonight if you want to join. I didn't respond. I drove home, poured myself a glass of wine, and tried to shake off the familiar feeling of being fundamentally wrong in my family's eyes. 2 weeks passed. I threw myself into work, grateful for a major project that demanded my full attention. My team was developing a new security protocol for our company's client portal, and the deadline was tight. I spent long days coding, testing, debugging, and presenting to stakeholders. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I was deep in concentration, reviewing lines of code on my dual monitors when my phone buzzed on my desk. I glanced at it absently, expecting a message from my project manager or maybe Taylor, my best friend. Instead, I saw a banking notification. A charge on my credit card for $3,200 from Pacific Dreams Travel Agency. My first thought was that there had been some mistake. I hadn't booked any travel. I picked up my phone to investigate further, and another notification appeared. $2,800. Same travel agency. My heart started pounding. I unlocked my phone fully and opened my banking app. As I watched, another charge appeared. $1,500, spa package reservation. Then another, $750, car rental service. I stopped breathing. The total was over $8,000, all charged in the span of 10 minutes, all from the same travel agency. I grabbed my purse from under my desk and yanked out my wallet. My credit card was right where it should be, tucked safely in its slot. So how? And then I remembered. 4 weeks ago, I'd gone to Sunday brunch at my parents' house. I'd left my purse on the hall table when I went to the bathroom. When I came back out, my mother was standing near it, and she'd helpfully carried it out to my car for me when I left. At the time, I'd thought it was a nice gesture. Now I realized what had actually happened. She must have taken photos of my credit card, front and back. All the information someone would need to make online purchases. My hands started shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone. I ran to one of the empty conference rooms and locked the door behind me. My breath was coming in short, angry bursts. I called my credit card company immediately. The automated system tried to route me through a dozen options, but I just kept saying, representative, 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 until a real person came on the line. This is Amanda. How can I help you today? Someone has stolen my credit card information and is making fraudulent charges, I said. My voice surprisingly steady despite the rage building in my chest. I need to dispute multiple transactions and freeze my account immediately. I'm so sorry to hear that, ma'am. Let me pull up your account. Can you verify your name and the last 4 digits of your card? I went through the security questions, then walked Amanda through each charge. She was professional and efficient, but I could hear the sympathy in her voice as the amounts added up. That's a total of $8,250 in fraudulent charges, she confirmed. I'm flagging all of these for dispute and freezing this card immediately. You should see the holds removed from your account within 3 to 5 business days while we investigate. We'll send you a new card within 7 to 10 business days. Thank you, I managed. I appreciate your help. I sat in that conference room for another 10 minutes, just trying to process what had happened. My parents had stolen from me. Not borrowed. Not asked. Stolen. They'd taken my financial information without permission and charged thousands of dollars, just assuming I'd accept it and come on their vacation. The audacity of it was breathtaking. My phone started buzzing with texts. I looked down and saw the family group chat lighting up. Brandon, the tickets aren't working. What's going on? Courtney, the travel agency says there's a payment issue. Did someone's card get declined? I didn't respond. I was still trying to wrap my mind around what they'd done. Another message, this time from my mother. Genevieve, did you freeze your card? The agency is saying all our tickets are being denied. I stared at that message for a long moment. Then I typed, did you seriously steal my credit card information and charge $8,000 without my permission? The response was immediate. Brandon. Oh, come on, don't be dramatic. They were just trying to include you. Amber chimed in. Maybe you should have just said yes in the first place. Then my mother. We thought you'd come around. Family is more important than money, Genevieve. I felt something break inside me. Not in a painful way, but in a liberating way. Like a chain I didn't know I'd been wearing suddenly snapping. I called the travel agency directly. A cheerful woman named Lisa answered. Hi, I need information about a booking made with my credit card, I said. I've disputed the charges because they were unauthorized, and I need to know the status of the entire reservation. Lisa's cheerfulness dimmed. Oh, yes. I see the flags on this account. Because you've disputed the charges, the entire booking has been frozen. No one in the party can travel until the payment issue is resolved. How long until the issue is resolved? That depends on your credit card company's investigation. It could take several weeks. The flight is in 3 days. Lisa sighed sympathetically. Then I'm afraid this booking won't be honored. The tickets have been voided. Thank you for the information, I said. I hung up and sat very still. My phone was exploding with messages now, but I didn't look at them. I just sat there, feeling something I hadn't felt in a very long time when it came to my family. Power. The morning of the flight arrived. I woke up at 6, made coffee, and settled at my kitchen table with my laptop. I was working from home that day, which turned out to be fortunate, because my phone started going absolutely crazy around 7:30. Brandon. The tickets aren't working. What did you do? Courtney. This is unbelievable. You're ruining our vacation. Amber. Jen, please, just fix this. Mom is crying. Patricia. How could you do this to your family? We're humiliated at the airport. Gerald. You're being petty and vindictive. We raised you better than this. I sipped my coffee and read each message carefully. Then I opened the family group chat and typed a single response. You stole $8,000 from me. I disputed fraudulent charges. That's not petty. That's protecting myself from theft. My phone immediately rang. Brandon. I declined the call. He called again. I declined again. Then he called from Courtney's phone. I answered that one. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he shouted before I could even say hello. "Do you know what you've done? We're standing at the airport like idiots. Mom is having a breakdown. Everyone is staring at us." "You committed credit card fraud," I said calmly, walking to my window and looking out at my garden. "That's a felony, Brandon." "Oh, so now you're going to press charges against your own parents?" His voice dripped with disgust. "What kind of daughter are you?" "The kind who doesn't let people steal from her," I replied. "Even when those people are family. They were trying to do something nice. They wanted to include you." "By committing a crime?" I asked. "By taking my financial information without consent and charging thousands of dollars? That's nice to you? You could have just said yes in the first place. None of this would have happened if you weren't so stubborn." I felt my jaw clench. I said no, Brandon. No is a complete sentence. It doesn't give anyone the right to steal from me. He launched into a tirade about how I'd always been difficult, always been selfish, always put myself above the family. I let him talk himself out, then very quietly said, "I'm hanging up now," and disconnected. The text continued for the next 2 hours. My mother sent long, rambling messages about how hurt she was, how she couldn't believe I'd be so cruel, how I was tearing the family apart over money. My father sent a voice message saying he was deeply disappointed in me and that I was throwing away my family over something that could have been resolved with a simple conversation. Amber tried a softer approach. "I know what they did was wrong, but can't you just let it go this once? Please? I don't want the family to fall apart." I responded only to Amber. "They stole from me, broke my trust, and have shown zero remorse. I'm not the one tearing this family apart. They did that when they decided my boundaries don't matter." She didn't respond after that. Around noon, I got up to make lunch. I was slicing tomatoes for a sandwich when my phone buzzed with a notification from my home security system. Motion detected at front door. I wiped my hands on a towel and opened the security app on my phone. The camera feed loaded, and my breath caught in my throat. My parents and Brandon were standing on my front porch. My mother was holding something in her hand, something small and metallic, a key, the spare key I'd given them 2 years ago for emergencies. I watched as she inserted it into my lock. I watched as she turned it. I watched as my front door opened, and all 3 of them walked into my house. For a moment, I couldn't move. I just stood there in my kitchen, watching on my phone as my family invaded my home. Then my brain kicked into gear, and I started recording the screen on a second device while the security camera captured everything. The audio came through clearly, my mother's voice. "Her checkbook should be in the desk. We can write a check to the travel agency." My father, "Look for her laptop. She probably has her banking information saved." Brandon was already moving through my living room, picking up mail from the kitchen counter where I'd left it that morning. I pulled up the non-emergency police number with shaking hands and made the call. "I need to report a break-in in progress," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I'm not home, but I'm watching it happen on my security camera. The people breaking in are my parents and my brother." The dispatcher asked for my address and confirmed officers were on the way. Then I called Taylor. She answered on the first ring. "Hey, what's up?" "My parents just broke into my house," I said flatly. "Can you get here? The police are coming." "What?" Taylor's voice went sharp with alarm. "I'm leaving right now. I'm 10 minutes away." I stayed on the phone with her while I continued watching my security feed. My parents and Brandon were systematically going through my belongings. My mother went into my bedroom and started opening dresser drawers. My father was in my home office, rifling through my file cabinet. Brandon had found my laptop on the coffee table and was trying to open it, but the password protection stopped him. Their commentary was even worse than the invasion itself. "Look at all these self-help books," my mother said dismissively, holding up a book from my nightstand. "She always thinks she's better than everyone," Brandon called from the living room. "She lives alone in this big house. What a waste. If she'd just been reasonable, none of this would be necessary," my father said, his voice heavy with self-righteousness. "I was recording All of it. Every word. Every action. Taylor arrived at my house at the same time as the police. I watched through the camera as she let them in, explaining that I was the homeowner and I was on video call with her. 2 officers entered my house, and the look on my parents' faces would have been funny if the situation weren't so devastating. My mother actually gasped. My father stepped back, hands raised. Brandon started talking immediately, his voice loud and defensive. One of the officers, a woman with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun, asked Taylor to put me on speakerphone. "Miss Chen, this is Officer Rodriguez. Can you explain the situation?" I explained that these were my parents and brother, that they'd let themselves in with a key I'd given them years ago for emergencies, and that they were attempting to access my financial information without permission. I told her about the credit card fraud from earlier in the week. "Do you want to press charges for breaking and entering and attempted theft?" she asked clearly. I could see my father's face on the camera. He was trying to explain that this was all a misunderstanding, that they were family, that I was overreacting. Officer Rodriguez listened to him politely, then walked over to where my mother was standing. "What's in your purse, ma'am?" My mother clutched her handbag defensively. "Nothing. Just my personal belongings. May I see?" Reluctantly, my mother opened her purse. Officer Rodriguez reached in and pulled out my checkbook, the one from my desk drawer. The other officer, whose name tag read Martinez, was standing near Brandon. "What are you holding, sir?" Brandon looked down at the papers in his hands as if he'd forgotten they were there. "Just some documents." "May I see those?" They were my tax returns from last year, from my locked file cabinet. Officer Rodriguez looked directly into the security camera, knowing I was watching. "Ma'am, these individuals have clearly entered your home without permission and have attempted to take your financial documents. Family relationship doesn't give anyone the right to commit crimes. I'm asking again. Do you want to press charges?" I thought about all the years of manipulation, all the times I'd been made to feel wrong for having boundaries, all the moments I'd swallowed my anger and accepted their behavior because family was supposed to mean something. "Yes," I said clearly. "I want to press charges." I arrived home 2 hours later. Taylor had stayed the entire time, watching as the officers took statements, photographed the scene, and documented every item my parents had taken or attempted to take. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my family had been removed from the property. They hadn't been arrested, but they'd been issued citations and informed that a restraining order was being processed. Taylor met me at the door and pulled me into a tight hug. "I'm so sorry," she said. "This is insane." We went inside together. The house felt violated somehow, even though nothing was damaged. I kept seeing my mother going through my dresser drawers, my father rifling through my files, Brandon picking through my personal papers. "I'm changing all the locks today," I said. "Right now." "I'll help," Taylor offered. "And I'm staying tonight. You shouldn't be alone." I called a 24-hour locksmith who arrived within an hour. While he worked on the locks, I sat at my kitchen table with Taylor and just tried to process everything that had happened. My phone kept buzzing. Extended family members were starting to weigh in. My Aunt Linda, my mother's sister, called and left a furious voicemail about how I'd had my own parents humiliated and how I should be ashamed of myself. I didn't call her back. Instead, I spent the evening researching attorneys. Taylor sat beside me, bringing me tea and occasionally reading reviews out loud. We finally found Morgan Hartley, a family law attorney who specialized in financial abuse cases. Her website listed experience with elder abuse, but also with adult children exploiting parents, and with parents exploiting adult children. I sent an email that night requesting a consultation. To my surprise, she responded within an hour, even though it was almost 9 o'clock. She could see me the next morning. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying the security footage in my mind. My mother's voice saying her checkbook should be in the desk. My father saying, if she'd just been reasonable, none of this would be necessary. The casual cruelty of their comments about my home, my books, my life. The next morning, I took personal time off work and drove to Morgan Hartley's office. She was a woman in her early 50s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She listened to my entire story without interrupting, taking notes occasionally. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and looked at me seriously. "What your parents did constitutes identity theft and credit card fraud," she said bluntly. "The break-in adds breaking and entering, and the attempted theft of your financial documents is another charge. You have an extremely strong case, both criminally and civilly." I twisted my hands in my lap. "These are still my parents," I said quietly. "Part of me feels like I should just let it go." Morgan leaned forward. "Genevieve, I'm going to be very direct with you. What you've described is a pattern of financial abuse. It didn't start with the vacation. They've been testing your boundaries for years, and every time you let something go, they escalated. If you don't set firm boundaries now, this will continue. It will get worse." I felt tears prick my eyes. I just wanted a normal family. "I know," she said, her voice gentler. "But you can't force people to be who you need them to be. You can only decide what you're willing to accept. The question is, are you willing to accept being stolen from? Being violated? Being manipulated?" "No," I whispered. "No, I'm not." "Then we need to pursue this," Morgan said. "Both criminal charges and a civil suit for damages. Not to punish them, but to establish that there are consequences for their actions. To protect yourself." I nodded slowly. "Okay, let's do it." Over the next week, things escalated in ways I couldn't have predicted. The extended family started getting involved en masse. Aunt Linda called repeatedly until I finally answered. "How could you have your own parents arrested?" she demanded. "I didn't have them arrested," I said calmly. "I reported a crime. The police made the decision to issue citations based on the evidence. It's just money. Family is forever." "Would you let someone steal $8,000 from you?" I asked. "Would you let someone break into your house and go through your personal belongings?" "That's different," she sputtered. "They're your parents. They raised you. That doesn't give them the right to commit crimes," I said, and ended the call. My Uncle Frank, my father's brother, sent a long email about forgiveness and turning the other cheek. He included Bible verses and talked about honoring thy father and mother. I deleted it without responding. Cousins started texting. Some were supportive, quietly telling me they'd had their own issues with my parents over the years. But most were critical, echoing the family line that I was overreacting and being vindictive. The family narrative was being carefully constructed by my mother. I heard through the grapevine that she was telling everyone I'd overreacted to a simple misunderstanding, that they'd only been trying to surprise me with a family vacation, and that I was tearing the family apart over a few $1,000s. The truth didn't seem to matter. The story was already set. Amber called one evening, crying. "Everyone is saying terrible things about you," she said. "Can't you just drop the charges? Can't we just go back to normal?" "Amber, they committed multiple crimes," I said gently. "They stole from me. They broke into my house. I'm not the villain here, but everyone thinks you are." She sobbed. "Then everyone is wrong," I said. "And if they can't see that, that says more about them than it does about me." She hung up without saying goodbye. A week and a half after the break-in, my credit card company completed their investigation. They sent me a detailed report of all the disputed charges, including a timeline and merchant information. I sat down to review it with Morgan at her office. As I read through the document, something caught my eye. There were charges I hadn't initially noticed because they were smaller and older, from 6 months ago. A restaurant charge for $473. A wine delivery for $612. A designer handbag purchase for $1,215. I looked up at Morgan, feeling sick. This wasn't the first time. She nodded grimly. "No, it wasn't. They've been stealing from you for months. You just didn't notice because the amounts were small enough to slip by." I calculated quickly in my head. The total wasn't $8,250. It was over $10,500. "We need to amend the civil suit," Morgan said, already making notes. This establishes a pattern of behavior. It strengthens your case considerably. I drove home feeling numb. 6 months. They'd been stealing from me for 6 months, and I hadn't even noticed. How many times had I sat at their dinner table, listened to them criticize my choices, accepted their subtle digs, all while they were systematically robbing me? That night, I allowed myself to cry. Not gentle tears, but deep, body-shaking sobs. I cried for the family I'd wanted, for the parents I'd deserved but never had, for all the years I'd spent trying to be good enough, trying to be worth their love and respect. Taylor came over with ice cream and just sat with me, not trying to fix anything, just being present. When I finally stopped crying, I felt something shift. The grief was still there, but underneath it was something harder, stronger. Resolve. 2 weeks passed. The criminal case moved forward, with the district attorney taking it seriously due to the amount stolen and the home invasion. My civil attorney filed an amended lawsuit against my parents for the full amount of $10,500, plus damages, legal fees, and the cost of my new security system and locks, which totaled another $3,000. The restraining order was officially granted. My parents had to stay at least 500 feet away from me, my home, and my workplace. But the family pressure intensified beyond anything I could have imagined. Aunt Linda organized a family meeting at her house. I wasn't invited, but my cousin Melissa secretly recorded portions of it and sent me the audio files. I sat in my car in a parking lot after work and listened with headphones. What I heard made my stomach turn. My mother was sobbing dramatically. I only wanted to include her in our family trip. I can't believe she'd be so cruel. She's always been difficult, but this is unforgivable. My father's voice was quieter but no less damaging. We gave her everything. Private school, college tuition, a car when she graduated. This is how she repays us. By dragging us through the legal system. Brandon sounded angry. She's always been selfish. Remember when she didn't come to Thanksgiving 2 years ago? Or when she missed Mom's birthday party? This doesn't surprise me at all. Amber was quiet through most of the recording, and I could hear the discomfort in her voice when she did speak. But isn't what they did illegal? She asked tentatively. Aunt Linda shut her down immediately. Family doesn't prosecute family. What Genevieve is doing is vindictive and hateful. We need to show her that actions have consequences. If she wants to be out of this family, we should grant her wish. There were murmurs of agreement around the table. I propose we all cut contact with Genevieve, Aunt Linda continued. No calls, no texts, no invitations. She wants to be alone? Let her be alone. Maybe then she'll realize what she's thrown away. The recording ended there. I sat in my car, hands gripping the steering wheel, feeling like I'd been punched in the chest. My phone rang. Melissa. I'm so sorry you had to hear that, she said immediately. But I thought you should know what they're saying. Thank you for telling me, I managed. Jen, I want you to know that not everyone agrees with them. My mom is being awful, and I'm ashamed of her. What your parents did was wrong. You're not overreacting. Her words were a lifeline. Thank you, I whispered. There's more, Melissa said hesitantly. I talked to my parents after everyone left. Your mom borrowed $5,000 from them 3 years ago, promised to pay it back within 6 months. Never did. When my dad asked about it, she said family doesn't keep tabs. I closed my eyes. Of course she did. And our cousin Jordan? His voice joined the call. Melissa had him on speaker. Your dad pressured me to invest in what he called a sure thing about 4 years ago. I lost $12,000. When I tried to talk to him about it, he acted like he had no idea what I was talking about. My parents had a pattern, not just with me but with the entire family. They exploited people, then acted wounded when called out. You should tell your attorney, Melissa said. This could help your case. I will, I promised. And thank you, both of you. It means everything that you believe me. We've always believed you, Jordan said quietly. We were just too scared to say anything out loud. After that call, I contacted Morgan and shared what I'd learned. She was very interested in the information about other family members being financially exploited. This establishes a clear pattern, she said. If any of them are willing to provide statements or testimony, it would strengthen your case significantly. Melissa and Jordan both agreed to provide written statements. So did another cousin, Harper, who came forward after hearing about the case. My parents had borrowed money from Harper's parents for a supposed medical emergency that never actually happened. The day of the civil court hearing arrived faster than I expected. I dressed carefully in a navy suit, wanting to look professional and composed. Morgan met me outside the courtroom. "Remember," she said, "you're not here to convince them you're right. You're here to present facts. The evidence speaks for itself." We entered the courtroom together. My parents were already seated with their attorney, a young man who looked fresh out of law school and deeply uncomfortable. I avoided making eye contact with them. The judge entered, and we all rose. Judge Patricia Hammond was a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and an expression that suggested she'd seen everything and wouldn't tolerate nonsense. The hearing began. Morgan presented the evidence methodically. Credit card statements showing the fraudulent charges, the police report from the break-in, security camera footage of my parents and Brandon going through my home, the older charges that established a pattern, written statements from Melissa, Jordan, and Harper about their own experiences with financial exploitation. My parents' attorney tried to argue that it was a family misunderstanding, that my parents had simply made a mistake in assuming I'd want to be included in the vacation. Judge Hammond looked at him skeptically. "They made a mistake by photographing her credit card information without permission and charging over $8,000? That's not a mistake, counselor. That's deliberate." The attorney floundered. He tried to paint me as vindictive, as someone with a grudge against her loving parents. Morgan dismantled that narrative quickly, presenting evidence of the monthly family dinners I attended, the birthday gifts I sent, the attempts I'd made to maintain a relationship despite being consistently marginalized. Then my mother made a critical error. She stood up, despite her attorney's attempt to stop her, and addressed me directly across the courtroom. "Please, honey," she said, her voice breaking. "You're destroying this family. Can't you see that?" Judge Hammond's gavel came down sharply. "Ma'am, you will remain seated and address the court, not the plaintiff." "But she's my daughter," my mother protested. "Doesn't that mean anything?" "It means you had a greater responsibility to treat her with respect," Judge Hammond said coldly. "And you violated that responsibility in the most egregious way possible. Please, sit down." The hearing lasted 3 hours. At the end, Judge Hammond reviewed her notes, looked at both parties, and delivered her ruling. "I find the evidence overwhelming, and the defendant's actions reprehensible," she said clearly. "The court orders the defendants to pay the plaintiff the full amount of $10,500 in stolen funds, plus $8,000 in damages and legal fees, plus court costs, totaling approximately $1,500. The total judgment is $19,750. My mother gasped audibly. My father's face went pale. Additionally, Judge Hammond continued, "I'm extending the restraining order for a period of 2 years. Any violation will result in immediate arrest and potential jail time. This court takes financial abuse within families very seriously, particularly when the perpetrators show no genuine remorse." She looked directly at my parents. "You are fortunate your daughter chose to pursue this civilly rather than pushing for criminal prosecution. I suggest you reflect seriously on your actions and consider seeking counseling for your behavior patterns." The gavel came down with finality. As we left the courtroom, I felt strangely empty. Not triumphant, not relieved, just empty. This was my family. These were the people who raised me, and it had come to this. In the hallway outside, Brandon was waiting. He stepped directly into my path, ignoring the courthouse security officer who immediately moved toward us. "I hope you're happy," he hissed. "You've destroyed Mom and Dad. They'll probably have to sell their house to pay you." "They stole from me," I said quietly. "Multiple times. For months. How is that my fault?" "You're pathetic," he spat. "Living alone in your perfect little house with your perfect little life. You have no idea what family actually means." The security officer stepped between us. "Sir, you need to move along." Brandon glared at me one more time, then turned and stalked away. I stood there for a moment, just breathing. Morgan touched my arm gently. "That was hard," she said. "But you did the right thing." Before I could respond, I heard a quiet voice behind me. "Jen?" I turned. Amber was standing there, looking small and scared. "Can we talk?" she asked, privately. 2 days after the court hearing, I met Amber at a small coffee shop across town, far from anywhere our family typically went. She was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth, nervously shredding a napkin. I slid into the seat across from her and waited. I'd learned not to fill silences anymore, not to make things easier when people owed me difficult conversations. Amber took a shaky breath. "I need to apologize," she said, not meeting my eyes. "I knew what they were doing was wrong. From the very beginning, I knew, and I said nothing." "Why?" I asked simply. She finally looked up, and I saw tears in her eyes. "Because I was scared. Because I'm still financially dependent on them. Because every time I've ever tried to make a choice they don't like, they threaten to cut me off." She started talking faster, the words pouring out like she'd been holding them back for years. "Do you know why they pay for my graduate school? It's not because they're generous. It's because it gives them control. Every single decision I make, I have to consider whether it will make them angry enough to stop the money. Who I date, where I live, what I study, how I spend my time. All of it is conditional." I felt a pang of sympathy despite everything. I didn't know it was that bad. "You got out," she said, a note of admiration in her voice. "You built your own life, made your own money, created independence. I watched you do it, and part of me was so jealous, because I didn't have the courage." Amber wiped her eyes with the shredded napkin. "When you stood up to them about the vacation, when you refused to just go along with what they wanted, I was terrified, because I knew they'd retaliate. I knew they'd escalate. And I was right. But you also showed me that it's possible to say no," she continued. "Watching you go through all of this, seeing you stand your ground even when the entire family turned against you, it was terrifying but also inspiring." She reached across the table and took my hand. "I've made a decision. I'm taking out student loans for my final year of graduate school. I'm creating distance from Mom and Dad. I can't keep living like this, waiting for the other shoe to drop, wondering when they'll use their money against me." I squeezed her hand. "That's really brave, Amber." "I've also been talking to Melissa and Jordan," she said. "After the hearing, after everything came out about them stealing from other family members too, we're all starting to see the pattern. How they manipulate people, use money as control, punish anyone who doesn't fall in line." We talked for 2 hours that afternoon. Amber shared stories I'd never heard, about threats and manipulation that had been carefully hidden. I shared my own experiences, and we cried together over the family we'd wanted but never really had. When we finally left the coffee shop, something had shifted between us. We weren't just sisters anymore. We were allies. Over the next 3 months, several significant things happened. My parents began making the court-ordered payments, though they did it in small monthly installments and complained bitterly about each one. My mother sent the checks with notes written on them. "For the daughter who values money over family, or from the parents you destroyed." I deposited the checks without comment. Brandon and Courtney cut me off completely, which honestly felt like a relief. I didn't have to manage Brandon's disdain or Courtney's passive-aggressive comments anymore. But other family relationships began to shift in unexpected ways. Melissa became one of my closest friends, calling regularly and inviting me to dinners with her partner. Jordan started a group chat with Amber, Melissa, and me, where we supported each other through the complicated process of setting boundaries with toxic family members. 4 other family members, emboldened by my case and the truth that came out, consulted with attorneys about their own situations with my parents. 2 of them ended up filing small claims suits. My parents' reputation within the extended family completely collapsed as more and more stories came to light. Aunt Linda actually called to apologize 3 months after the hearing. She learned that my parents had borrowed money from her own parents, my grandparents, and never repaid it. They'd been hiding it for years. "I was wrong," she said simply. "I'm sorry I didn't listen to you." I started therapy with a counselor who specialized in family trauma. Dr. Sarah Chen helped me work through years of gaslighting, manipulation, and conditional love. She taught me that setting boundaries wasn't selfish, that protecting myself wasn't cruel, and that I deserved relationships built on mutual respect. Amber joined me for a few sessions, and we worked on building a healthy sibling relationship separate from our parents' influence. I grew closer to Taylor, who'd been my rock through everything. I also reconnected with friends I'd lost touch with over the years, people I'd pushed away during times when my family demanded all my emotional energy. I created what Dr. Chen called a chosen family. People who showed up for me, who respected my boundaries, who celebrated my strengths instead of punishing them. 6 months after the whole ordeal began, I did something I'd been dreaming about for years. I booked a solo trip to Ireland. 2 weeks of hiking, visiting small towns, exploring castles, and sitting in cozy pubs. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't ask anyone's permission. I just went. I posted photos on a private social media account that my parents couldn't access. Pictures of the cliffs of Moher, of colorful buildings in Galway, of ancient stone circles and green rolling hills. Taylor commented, "This is what you deserve." Amber commented, "So proud of you, sis." Melissa commented, "You look genuinely happy." And I was. For the first time in years, maybe in my whole life, I felt genuinely, authentically happy. On my last day in Ireland, I sat in a small cafe in Galway, watching rain streak down the windows and sipping the best hot chocolate I'd ever tasted. I pulled out the journal I'd been keeping during the trip and started writing. I wrote about the past 6 months, about the pain of being betrayed by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, about the shock of discovering that their love had always been conditional, based on my compliance rather than my inherent worth. But I also wrote about what I'd gained, the self-respect that came from standing up for myself, the peace that came from enforcing boundaries, the joy of building relationships with people who actually valued me. I wrote about Amber's transformation, how she'd taken out those student loans and moved into her own apartment, how she'd started making decisions based on what she wanted, not what our parents approved of, how our relationship had deepened into something real and supportive. I wrote about the chosen family I'd built. Taylor, who'd been there through every crisis. Melissa and Jordan, who'd found their own courage through witnessing mine. Harper, who'd sent me care packages and funny memes when the family pressure was at its worst. I wrote about the hard lessons I'd learned. That you can't force people to respect you, but you can refuse to accept disrespect. That setting boundaries isn't about punishing others, it's about protecting yourself. That family should feel like safety, and if it doesn't, you have the right to create that safety elsewhere. As I wrote, something became crystal clear. For my entire life, I'd believed that I was the problem, that if I could just be better, kinder, more accommodating, more successful, quieter, louder, different in some fundamental way, then my family would treat me with the love and respect I craved. But the problem was never me. The problem was their belief that love came with conditions, that family meant ownership, that boundaries were betrayals. I couldn't change them. I couldn't make them see what they'd done wrong. I couldn't force them to value me, but I could value myself. I could build a life that reflected my worth. I could surround myself with people who understood that love doesn't come with a price tag. I thought about my mother's last text, the one I'd received a week before leaving for Ireland. It had said simply, "Can we talk?" I hadn't responded. I hadn't deleted it either. I'd just left it there, unanswered, a perfect metaphor for our relationship. I didn't owe her my emotional energy. I didn't owe her access to my life. I didn't owe her anything. I closed my journal and looked out at the rain-soaked streets of Galway. In a few hours, I'd head to the airport and fly home. Home to my house with its new locks and updated security system. Home to my job that I loved and colleagues who respected me. Home to my chosen family and the life I'd built on my own terms. The weight I'd been carrying for 28 years, the weight of trying to earn love that should have been freely given, was finally gone. I paid for my hot chocolate and walked out into the Irish rain, tilting my face up to feel the drops on my skin. I felt light. I felt free. I felt whole. 3 days later, I was back in my kitchen, unpacking groceries and planning a dinner party. I'd invited Amber, Taylor, Melissa, Jordan, and Harper, my chosen family, the people who'd stood by me when it mattered. My phone was on the counter, playing music while I chopped vegetables. I was making lasagna from scratch, Taylor's favorite. The house smelled like garlic and basil and home. My phone buzzed with an email notification. I glanced at it while rinsing lettuce. It was from my mother. Subject line, "Can we talk?" I looked at that email for a long moment. Part of me, the part that still remembered being a little girl who just wanted her mother's approval, wanted to open it. Wanted to see if maybe, finally, there would be an apology, an acknowledgement of wrongdoing, an attempt at real change. But I'd learned something crucial over the past 6 months. Hope without evidence is just fantasy. And I had no evidence that my parents were capable of the kind of deep change that would make a relationship with them healthy or safe. I didn't open the email. I didn't delete it. I just left it there, unread, and went back to preparing dinner. The doorbell rang an hour later. Taylor arrived first, carrying wine and flowers. Then Amber, bringing the dessert we'd planned together. Melissa and Jordan came together, arms full of board games. Harper arrived last, with a homemade card that made me cry happy tears. We gathered around my table, passing dishes and telling stories and laughing until our sides hurt. At one point, Amber raised her glass. "To Genevieve," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "for showing all of us what courage looks like, for teaching us that we deserve respect, for being the kind of person who stands up for herself even when it costs her everything." "To Jen," everyone echoed, and we clinked glasses. I looked around at these faces, these people who'd chosen to be in my life not because of obligation or blood relation, but because of genuine care and mutual respect. This was what family was supposed to feel like. Safe, supportive, celebrating each other's strengths instead of exploiting weaknesses. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and I was loading the dishwasher, I thought about everything I'd learned. About the journey from being a woman who accepted mistreatment because she'd been taught that family meant sacrifice, to being a woman who understood that she deserved better. I'd learned that setting boundaries doesn't make you cruel. It makes you healthy. I'd learned that protecting your peace isn't selfish. It's necessary. I'd learned that the people who truly love you will respect your limits, and the people who don't respect your limits don't actually love you. They love controlling you. I'd learned that you can grieve the family you wanted while also celebrating the family you built, that both things can be true at the same time. Most importantly, I'd learned that my worth wasn't determined by whether my parents could see it. My worth was inherent, unchangeable, not up for negotiation. I was enough. I had always been enough. And anyone who couldn't see that didn't deserve space in my life. I finished cleaning the kitchen and walked through my house, turning off lights. This house that I'd bought with my own money, that I'd filled with things I loved, that was protected by locks my parents' keys couldn't open. This house that was mine, completely and totally mine. I climbed into bed with a book, feeling the kind of peace that comes from living in alignment with your values. Tomorrow, I'd wake up and go to work. I'd have lunch with Amber later in the week. I'd plan another trip, maybe to Scotland this time. I'd continue building this life that reflected who I actually was, not who my parents wanted me to be. My phone sat on the nightstand, that unread email still waiting. I glanced at it one more time, then deliberately turned the phone face down. I didn't owe them a response. I didn't owe them access. I didn't owe them anything. What I owed was to myself, and I was finally giving myself exactly what I deserved. Love without conditions, respect without exceptions, peace without compromise, a life built on my own terms, surrounded by people who valued me for exactly who I was. I turned off the light and settled into sleep, smiling in the darkness. I was free. I was whole. I was home. Now, I want to ask you something. Have you ever had to set a boundary with family that felt impossible? Have you ever been made to feel selfish for protecting yourself? I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. Your experience might help someone else who's struggling with the same situation. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button. It helps more people find these stories and realize they're not alone in their struggles. And if you want to hear more stories about standing up for yourself, finding your strength, and building the life you deserve, please subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. We all know someone who's struggling to set boundaries with difficult family members. Sometimes just knowing that others have walked this path and come out stronger on the other side can make all the difference. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I hope it reminded you that you deserve respect, that your boundaries matter, and that it's never too late to start protecting your peace. Remember, family should feel like love, not obligation. And if it doesn't, you have every right to build something better. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next story.